The hardest part about this distance is not knowing how or when it'll end. It feels like a slow burn that leaves me wondering if things will ever go back to what they used to be. When silence becomes the only language we share, it's hard to remember the warmth we once knew. Keeping our distance is the only thing that makes sense, but it doesn't make it any easier. Distance is a strange thing. It can make you feel free, but it can also make you feel more trapped than ever before. And right now, I feel like I'm caught in the space between love and hurt. I never imagined our bond would come to this. What once felt like a close-knit connection now feels like a distant memory, and I'm left wondering if there's a way back. Keeping our distance isn't about anger or resentment. It's about giving ourselves the time and space to understand what's happened and what we need moving forward. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone you love is step back, even if it feels like you're drifting apart. We just need time to heal. The distance between us feels like an unspoken agreement, but the emptiness it leaves behind speaks louder than words ever could. I never thought the day would come when we'd have to keep our distance, but now that it's here, it's become clear that sometimes love isn't enough to heal the rifts. Keeping a distance doesn't mean I don't care. It just means we both need space to figure things out and to come to terms with the way things have changed. The silence that fills the space between us is deafening, and yet I know it's necessary. We need this time apart to figure out what comes next for us. It's strange how quickly a close relationship can feel distant, but I know that the love hasn't disappeared. It's just been temporarily hidden under layers of hurt. Sometimes you need distance to see things clearly. I hope that by keeping my distance, we'll both understand what we need to do to heal. Even though we're keeping our distance, I can't help but think of the sister I used to know and wonder if that connection is lost forever or just waiting to be rediscovered. The distance doesn't mean I've given up. It means I'm giving both of us the space to find ourselves again, even if it takes time. We've always been close, but now the distance between us feels like an unbridgeable gap. I hope that one day we'll find a way to understand each other again. What hurts the most is the silence. I wish I knew how to make things right, but for now, all I can do is give us both the space we need. Sometimes keeping a distance is the only way to protect what little is left. We need to heal, and maybe one day we'll come back stronger. The distance between us doesn't erase the love. It just makes it harder to reach across the divide, to find a way to fix what's been broken. I miss the bond we had, but I know that right now, distance is the best thing for both of us. Maybe someday we'll find our way back to each other. Keeping our distance feels like the hardest thing, but maybe it's the only thing that can allow us to grow individually and hopefully heal what's been torn. Distance can be the beginning of healing, but it also feels like a painful reminder of what we've lost. I just hope it's not too late for us to rebuild what we had. I never thought I'd be here, keeping my distance from the one person who knows me best. But sometimes distance is the only way to protect both of us from further hurt. The hardest part isn't the space between us, but the realization that sometimes keeping a distance is the only way to prevent things from getting worse. The distance between us doesn't mean I love you any less. It just means that we need this time to figure things out and heal in our own way. It's strange how quickly things can change, but I'm hoping that this distance isn't permanent. It's just the space we need to figure out who we are to each other now. Even though we're apart, I know that distance can be a catalyst for growth. I hope that when we do come back together, it's as a stronger, more understanding version of ourselves. The silence is the hardest part, but I know that in time, this distance will make sense, and hopefully, it will help us heal what's been broken. Keeping a distance isn't about giving up. It's about recognizing that we both need time to process and to heal before we can come back together. Every day feels like a step further away from the sister I once knew, but I hold on to the hope that this distance will eventually lead us back to each other. I don't want to be distant, but right now, it feels like the only way to give us both the space to grow and heal. I hope we'll find our way back to each other eventually. The pain of the distance between us isn't something I ever expected to feel, but it's the only thing that makes sense right now. Sometimes it's not the distance in miles that separates us, but the emotional distance that grows when there are unsaid words, unhealed wounds, and misunderstandings between us, especially when it's all rooted in the delicate bond of family. We've kept our distance, and it stings every time I realize that it's not because we want to, but because of the invisible barriers built by a place where love and loyalty clash. The space between us feels vast, but it's only filled with things I can't say. The connection we once had is still there, buried beneath the weight of past events, and I'm not sure how to break the silence. It's strange how the people closest to us can become the ones we push away the hardest. My sister and I were once inseparable, but now I wonder if we'll ever find our way back. The distance isn't just physical, It's emotional, psychological, and painful. It's something we never wanted, but here we are, finding ourselves keeping our distance for reasons that make sense and yet don't at the same time. In some ways, I wish things had turned out differently, but now the space between us is the only thing I know. I just hope one day we'll understand each other again. The quiet between us feels louder than any argument ever could. It's as though silence has taken over everything, and all I want is to find a way to break through it. Family shouldn't feel like an impossible distance, but sometimes the bond we have with our loved ones can become strained in ways that leave us with no choice but to step back, even if it hurts. We are family, but sometimes I feel like we are strangers. I wonder how we became so distant, and if there's any way to bridge that gap again, especially when it's rooted in something as delicate as sisterhood. Every day apart feels like a missed opportunity, but the distance we've kept is a reminder of how far apart we've drifted, despite everything we once had. I can't help but feel that the space between us isn't just the result of what's happened, but also the result of everything we never said and everything we failed to understand. Keeping my distance feels like the right thing to do, even if it doesn't feel good. There's a part of me that hopes we'll both find peace in our own time before we try to bridge the gap. Sometimes distance is necessary, even in families, especially when emotions are raw and there's more that needs to heal than can be fixed in a single conversation. The distance between us feels unnatural, but it's become a defense mechanism. I wish things could go back to how they were, but I know healing takes time. I've learned that sometimes keeping distance is a form of self-preservation. It's not about abandoning each other, it's about giving space for healing and clarity. I never imagined that keeping distance would become our reality. It feels as though the bond that once held us together is now a mere memory, fading with time and silence. It's heartbreaking how something so simple as words could have led to this distance. But I'm learning that sometimes silence is necessary for both of us to process what's happened. I've always thought that distance could never exist between sisters, but I've learned that sometimes it's the only option when feelings get tangled and hurt runs deep. What hurts the most is not the physical distance, but the emotional separation we've created. How do we come back from a place where words can't even begin to express what's been felt? I never wanted this distance, but sometimes life has a way of leading us to places where we're forced to distance ourselves from the ones we love, even when we don't understand why. We were once inseparable, and now it feels like we're worlds apart. The silence between us is deafening, and I don't know if there's enough left to bridge this gap. Even though we're apart, I still carry her in my heart. The distance between us doesn't erase the love we shared, but it's made it harder to remember the good times. The distance feels like a wound, one that hasn't healed yet. I wonder if it ever will, or if it's just the new reality we have to face. Our connection once felt unbreakable, but now it's as if I'm holding on to memories and not the present. The gap between us feels endless, but I can't help but hope we'll find our way back. I've never known a love that felt so distant. It's strange to feel so far away from someone I once understood so well. Distance doesn't just separate us physically, it separates our hearts too. I never thought that would happen with my sister, but here we are, trying to figure out how to heal from what caused the distance in the first place. Sometimes it's hard to accept that the person you thought you'd always be close to is now someone you feel you have to keep a distance from, for reasons neither of you are ready to talk about.